Hello, hello. Today's guest is an extraordinary artist whose work feels like it's been lived through, not just made. Alexis Soul-Gray is a British painter whose work explores memory, loss, and maternal lineage through richly layered works that move between abstraction and figuration. Working from her studio in Devon, she creates surfaces that feel both intimate and expansive. She's a graduate of the Royal College of Art, the Royal Drawing School, Camberwell College of Arts and Central St Martin's in London. She's received 2 Elizabeth Greenshields Foundation Grants and was the winner of the Delphian Open in 2021. She's exhibited internationally, has work in private and public collections, and her work has been featured in publications from the Art Newspaper, Financial Times, Forbes, Ocular to Plaster magazine. Alongside her studio practice, Alexis was, at the time of recording, also co-curating a group exhibition at Amici Studios in Hastings, her 4th curatorial project, titled Declarative Language. The exhibition brings together women artists whose practices have been shaped by sustained caregiving within families of neurodivergent children, and considers how care, compression of time, heightened attention, and the realities of daily adaptation can profoundly reshape artistic work. In this conversation, we move across a wide and deeply human landscape. We talk about early influences in art school and what happens when your confidence is knocked at a formative stage. We speak about grief, intuition, and the long, uneven process of finding your way back to yourself after loss. We explore motherhood, caregiving, financial reality, advocacy, the politics of the art world, and what it means to keep making work that is true to your experience rather than bending it to fit someone else's agenda. What unfolds is not a single narrative, but a layered one, honest, searching, and quietly defiant. This is a conversation about endurance, about artistic identity, and about what it really takes to keep going when life doesn't unfold in a straight line. Welcome to the Extraordinary Creatives podcast. Alexis, thank you for joining us. Where are you coming from today? And how would you describe your work to someone who's never encountered it before?
I am currently sitting in my home studio in Devon. And how would I describe? I guess my work is a sort of, in a sense, a kind of storytelling of years and experiences from the past and a very real-time experience every day coming together in this kind of clash within painting and collage and collecting. There's quite a lot of appropriating in my practice. It's a kind of like, I feel like it's a sort of crescendo of noises and experiences kind of coming together. I think I've described it as, before I started unpicking my practice again as later in life, I described it as having like a massive compost heap of all this stuff that I needed to bring together. And I think through painting and collage over the last 5 years, I've been kind of pulling this compost heap apart and bringing them back together somehow.
Yeah, I love that idea of something so kind of rich and verdant and but providing fuel for the next generation of things to blossom from. The idea of your kind of work being a compost also helps us to understand how you metabolize your experience through painting, which is really important to, I know. So we're going to get into that a little bit more, but let's rewind a little and unpack where you grew up. And can you say where your earliest encounters with art and creativity came from?
Yeah. So I grew up in a sort of around London, kind of like the suburbs of London, West London, and then kind of in Essex, really, in a village in Essex, and then back into the suburbs of East London. So sort of skirting the M25, really. You know, I was always like a 20-minute train journey into Liverpool Street or something, you know, or the other end. So London was essentially home, but also Essex as well. Both my parents were into art. You know, they both studied art In fact, my mum had been my dad's art lecturer at university. That's how they met.
Oh.
Sounds dodgy, but my mum was a very young lecturer. Let's just say that. And towards the end of the course, so it does sound a bit dodgy, but it was okay in the end. But there was art on the walls, you know, not original artworks, because they wouldn't have been able to afford to buy that, but there were prints. You know, there was a lot of, sadly, mainly male prints on the wall. There was a Berthe Morisot, but there was a lot of like Picasso, Matisse, Kokoschka. Mainly quite mainstream kind of art history on the walls, but yeah, so there were books as well, and I would look at them, and art wasn't really talked about in the sense that you could be an artist, but it was very much talked about in a kind of art education sense, like that it was an important subject. And I definitely grew up with it around me.
What kind of work did they both make?
Neither of them really became practicing artists, so they weren't making work. They had both studied art. My mum went a bit further than my dad. So my mum had gone to the RCA and done a master's degree in textile design, but had a small baby whilst she was there, and life never allowed any practice to come after that. She just ended up in art education, in like our arts management in education, actually. And my dad was a design technology teacher, always was that. So there was no practice there was no practice to see. But the subject was very much in the house.
Yeah. So there was an idea that art was important to life in some way.
Yeah.
So much so that your parents both facilitated other people's understanding and experience of it. So where did your journey begin through, and when did you realise that painting would become the centre of your life as an artist?
Well, that's been quite a kind of meandering experience as well. So art was always my best subject. Like, it was quite obvious that I was quite good at it. I engaged okay at secondary school, but I didn't really care about any other subject except art. And I got really into like the 1960s pop artists, and Pauline Botti and Derek Bochier, you know, they were my like heroes at the time. And I had this kind of romantic vision of going to art school and being in London and, you know, having fabulous blonde hair and smoking cigarettes and stuff. I guess like I just kind of, yeah, it was the early 90s, and that was my vision of my future. But it wasn't until I was thinking about this, and actually I think the moment I really felt something special was I went on a school trip to New York, of all places. There probably aren't many schools running, and this was just a normal school. It wasn't like a private school or anything, but we went to New York, and it just landed with me in this incredible way. And when I left, I cried on the plane. I felt like I needed to go back. I never went back. I went at 17. I've never been there since. I'm 45.
Wow.
Soon, hopefully,
Amazing.
I'll go back to New York. Yeah, going to the Met Museum. No, it was the Museum of Modern Art, sorry, and seeing huge Rothkos, you know, in these beautifully lit rooms. And I remember I spent all my spending money on this really large Rothko poster that was about £40 or £50 at the time. Was all my spending money gone. You know, I couldn't go and buy those cheap Levi's that I was looking forward to buying at the time. And yeah, it was a real moment. And I think I knew then that that was it, and there was no other purpose. And, you know, that I was going to go to art school and I wanted to study painting, but I didn't actually study painting. So that's what I was going to say next, is that I didn't study painting at BA. I studied drawing. And during the time on the drawing course, I tried to get into the painting course, but I built it up in such a way. That, you know, there was about, I don't know, 5 or 6 people going for 2 places from different courses, and they didn't choose me, and I didn't get in. So I stayed in drawing. And I remember the reason I didn't get in is that they said that I had really badly stretched my canvases, like really badly, like baggy, wonky, everything that you don't do. And I remember just thinking, well, I'd never been taught how to do it, and I'd done it very badly. And I'm so good at it now. My corners are so tight. The canvas is like a drum every time. And if I go to another gallery, and I have experienced this in London before, go to a gallery and you see this show, and I've seen canvas on the wall that's a bit baggy or like a bit wonky, and I'm like, oh, no, I can't deal with that. But
So interesting, because I don't know if it's like a positive or a negative, really, that you should not get into something because of that. I understand the attention to detail could be indicative of how much you want something. But actually, really, it's like, what's the work like on that baggy canvas is the most important thing.
I think also that was a problem though, Kerry, looking back, because this was like, I started the course in 2000. I went to Central St Martin's 1999 to 2000, and 2000 to 2003 I was at Camberwell, and I was painting my dying grandfather, and they did not care about that at all. It was so frowned upon to be making work that came from some kind of personal experience or the lived every day. Work had to be separated through layers of conceptual academic rigor and hidden. So the emotional life wasn't relevant at the time, and so I was really kind of like shut down at that moment. And painting became this kind of other space that I felt that I didn't belong in at that point, even though I continued to paint. But it hurt me and damaged my confidence. Yeah.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Unfortunately, I know you're not the only person to have experienced that. And we've heard on the podcast from quite a few artists who had gone through a time. I think we probably went to art college at similar times, Alexis. And I think it was deeply unfashionable, as you say, at that time.
Yeah.
The figurative and the personal. And I think partly because of the sort of academic thrust, and certainly, the theory that was really rampant at the time. But also in retrospect, when I look back and I think it's just such bullshit, this idea of a universal truth or a universal something that could speak, in a sense, to everybody. I think, we're always looking through our own personal lens, and so I think it's interesting to know there are fashions in art, but it's also, as you say, so alienating, a way of encouraging people to explore their own creativity, to bring shame or embarrassment or, for people to worry about whether their work is fashionable is kind of way beyond the point, right?
Yeah, and I it's so different now, and I've recently gone in and given tutorials to students in art colleges, and the conversation is so different that it actually, I didn't realize that my personal experiences really counted for very much at all until I went back to do a master's degree, to be honest. Even, it took that long until I was around 39, 40 to really feel the confidence to just be myself within the practice and to not try and hide behind a version of myself that I think that tutor wants me to be or that gallerist wants me to be, just to be myself. And I'm trying really hard to stay in that space of not adjusting what I'm doing to please a certain program or a certain journalist or anything like that.
Yeah, it's where the work really is, I think, for most artists, isn't it? Is to get to the nub of what it is that you really want to say in your own way. How did you manage then in that time where you you might have not had your confidence knocked at college, and then
Mm,
before you went back to the MA, how did you
yeah.
navigate that period?
So I graduated in 2003, and actually for a couple of years I did quite well. I won a graduate prize with First Sight in Essex and got a show through that. I was invited to do a couple of other group shows here and there. And sort of I was one of the graduates from that year that seemed to be doing well. Um, I guess I don't want to say people keep knocking my confidence. It was my own mother, actually. um, I was in this group show, and it was kind of one of these like awful group shows in a big bank, and but they'd put me next to like Picasso, so it was a big moment for me. But I'd made this very figurative painting of a little girl staring out from the back, looking into a landscape, a seascape, and she's looking out to sea. And I stood in front of this work at the private view, and my parents were there, and my mum just said to me, "Do you think that's the best work you've ever made?" And
Oh, ouch!
and I actually left the private view in tears and went home on my own and never went to even pick the painting up. I had no idea where this painting is. um,
Wow.
there's this kind of thing happening, but I also was graduating into living in London, and I couldn't afford a studio. I just had to work all the time. So that painting, for example, I remember making it in the living room of a flat I was staying in. And so there wasn't really this kind of healthy space to after graduation to be developing ideas, because I was just struggling to survive in London. So I was working
Yeah.
in shops and working at the Tate and working in bars and restaurants just all the time. And that got very tiring. So
Yes.
then I decided to do a teaching qualification in 2005 to 6. So I'd been doing a few things, just working constantly, got tired. This isn't going to, I need to have proper income. So I got the teaching qualification. But during that year, my mum was diagnosed with cancer just before I kind of finished my teaching qualification. And I then split up with a boyfriend, moved back home to help care for her. And then instead of going into a teaching job, because I just knew that I couldn't, given the emotional turmoil that was going on, I went back to art school. So I went to the what's now the Royal Drawing School, which it was the Prince's Drawing School at the time, to do the drawing year. So I went back to art school, and I was living at home with my dying mother, and going in to East London from East London, Essex border, zone 6 on the central line, going in and out every day, drawing constantly. So I was kind of like in out school, then out, then in, then out. It was a lot of back and forth and not much continuity. And then when I was at the drawing school, my mum died in the December. And from then, the few years between 2007 and 2010, really, I was just really depressed. Isn't really a good description of it, because I've always been kind of like quite stoic and a bit of a fighter, and I just keep going. I was treated for depression, but in a very small way, like I'd just be like, oh, it's fine, I'll just
Yeah.
carry on. I had about four counseling sessions, and then I was like, I'm fine, I'm just going to carry on, whatever. I'm just going to I do some bonkers things, like sell all my possessions and move to a barn in Cornwall, and I just kept trying to run away basically from London, but I was just trying to run away from the emotional landscape that I was trying to survive in. And
Yeah.
it wasn't really until 2010 that I think I really found my feet again. Yeah, so it kind of lost, I feel like I lost sort of those good years in your 20s where, you know, and in that time I made horrendous applications to like the Royal College of Art and the Royal Academy and even like Edinburgh College of Art. I didn't get into any of them because my applications were horrendous. You know, I'd probably done them in half an hour. You know, I just wasn't in a good place and I just couldn't quite get myself out of it. And also I was estranged from my dad at that time, and the whole family had kind of not disbanded, but collapsed really. So there, I guess I was just like treading water, treading water in this like haze of emotional turmoil, you know, and talking about it now, I can feel, you know, like the emotions are still there. And I feel really sad that I was so alone at that time. And it's no wonder really that I did make work and I destroyed pretty much everything I made. I was so embarrassed by everything I made.
Embarrassed? Why, Alexis?
I just found myself ridiculous and not part of the whatever the art world was at that time, which I didn't have any idea what it was. I was completely on the outside. You know, I didn't go to private views. I went to art galleries, but I wasn't part of anything. I didn't really know people that were. Yeah, I was just a bit of a mess.
Alexis, thank you so much for sharing. And, you know, I know that you will be speaking to so many of our listeners because they will recognise those curveballs that we get thrown. And, you know, processing grief as a creative person, and particularly, I mean, a mother that dies is a complex grief for women, I think, and particularly if we don't have support systems around us, you know, if either our peers haven't been through something similar or, you know, just to understand the depth of our own grief and suffering is one thing, but then also to find a safe space when we've got such emotion in our body, in our minds. You know, it's a loss in so many different ways, isn't it? And I think that kind of finding yourself again through it, and unfortunately the only way through it is through it, isn't it? So it sounds like the fact that you kept going, you kept making, even though it was hard to look at the self-portraits, it was hard to look at yourself at that time because the wounding, I'm sure, was so deep that actually we don't want to be visible. I always think of it as being like it's like being a soft mollusk without its shell, you know, and at the slightest that feels like a seagull could peck at us at any moment, and so we have to protect that soft kind of undertongue. And so I really get a sense of you kind of trying to find your footing again after that time. What is it, do you think, that helped eventually bring yourself back to yourself?
I went to do a residency in Oxfordshire. It was like a school residency, but it was income I really needed at the time. Low income, but regular, which meant I could leave London and go and live somewhere else for a year. And I rented this old post office that was going to be demolished after the year of me living there. And it was in the middle of really beautiful open countryside in North Oxfordshire, not far from Banbury. I'd never been to that area of the UK before, and I found myself very alone. I'd got 2 cats. I'd rescued 2 cats from London and they came with me. And I would walk a lot and explore the landscape around me through walking. And actually, sometimes I would walk 3-4 hours a day. And I would listen to a lot of music. Didn't really have many podcasts at that time. So this was like 2009 to 10, I think. So just being I'd split up with a boyfriend who was sort of in and out of my life, you know, not really like the seagull attacking the mollusk, but it wasn't that far off. You know, we were
Yeah.
young and it was complicated, but that had ended, and I was there alone, and it was very painful to be there by myself. But I started painting again whilst I was there in a very private way. I almost didn't know if I really could paint or not. I knew I could draw. I knew that I could
Yes.
draw. I had something that was very much part of me that was very natural. I'd spent the year doing the drawing year, and it was something that came. It was like like another limb. It's like breathing to me, drawing. And I was like, well, can I actually paint? Actually. And I would sit alone. And I remember there was New Year. I think it was New Year 2000 and God, I get really confused of the years. New Year 2009, I think, possibly 2008 to 9. It's all a bit of a haze. But I was like, this new year, I'm going to sit alone in this studio I've got, and I'm going to be painting. And I don't want to speak to anyone. And as the hours passed and the new year kind of rang in, I might have had the radio on, so I might have heard Big Ben. And it was this kind of gleeful isolation that I'd chosen for myself, to be painting alone. And I started copying, actually, for the first time, master paintings, just to see if I could. You know, that was my way back in.
Yeah.
So I
Yes.
started copying like Bronzino, actually, and I wasn't bad at it. And I was like, oh, okay, actually, maybe I can do this. So yeah, that was a moment for me, really facing myself and all of this not believing in myself, all the baggage from art school, all the baggage from mum's death. Just being alone in that place was necessary and very healing.
Yeah.
But then when I came back, I
Do
came
you know?
back to London. Yeah, I came back to London, and I started curating shows, actually, at that point. So I curated a large art exhibition in that house, bringing all these artists together just before it was demolished. So that was the first time I curated a show, was that building. Ripped out all the carpets, put all this art in there, had live music and performance. And, this was time before social media. Like,
Yeah.
it might, and there's hardly any record of these. There is a record, but there's hardly anything. No one was taking photos. Well, who cares? You've got nowhere to put it. Um, there was a bit of Facebook, but not much at that time. So yeah, actually, the act of curating that show was very healing for me.
Yes. I was really struck by your self-exile, that actually that choosing to take yourself away to heal and
Mm,
facing and processing the experiences, as you're talking about walking for that length each day, is one of the tools that we would recommend to artists trying to move emotion through the body. So
yeah.
using music and walking and actually kind of letting it move through you is one of the smartest things you could do.
Yeah.
But also proactively making a choice that I want to
Mm.
be in the studio making painting at New Year, and feeling the glee of your choice
Yeah.
is an incredible gift, because that's very similar actually to gratitude practice, which is, people I do it, but pretty much every leader around the world has some form of gratitude practice, and I
Mm.
think when you've been through something so tough, actually it's a very important route back to yourself, to
Yeah.
acknowledge what you want, what you're choosing, because you need a sense of agency, right? To
Mm.
feel that you've actually got something that you're actively pursuing, that is because you love it, not because anyone's forcing you to do it. Or
Yeah.
but I was interested in how you move from that to then bringing yourself into a social space. So
Mm.
how did you decide who you wanted to be in relationship to when you were curating that show?
I think that show had very loose curatorial, framework, I would say. For me, it was more of a who do I have around me that I can bring together? And I think I'd moved through some things, and I think I then felt very lonely. And it was almost like an arts collective more than like a curated, less like the show I'm doing now in Hastings. This was more like an artist collective of people who were giving me conversation and friendship and pooling around me when so much had been pulled away from me. And I wanted to bring them together around me, literally like pulling them around me, like almost like a hug or something. And for a lot of the artists who were in that show, you know, they still talk about it as being such a special moment. I think it was just me trying to find support, and the way to find support was to support other people to achieve something together, to make it meaningful in some way.
That's
Yeah.
so important. I'm so glad you shared that, because I think that very often artists can tie themselves up in knots in terms of what they give themselves permission to do, and that curating belongs to somebody else, or that you have to have like a highfalutin thesis to do
Yeah.
something. But actually, as artists, you have a very, very highly tuned instinct for
Mm.
good quality art and good vibes and good
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And your instinct operates at a very different level. It's like you're the Olympic athlete when it comes to intuition. And
Yeah, I
so
think so.
choosing people, people that you feel connected to, that you feel excited by, but that actually that you want to lift up is
Yeah.
so rewarding, and such a good reason to do a show.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, Alexis, what is the work that you included in that? And was it the start of something for you?
People then joked, oh, Alexis just threw in a painting last minute, didn't even think about herself. But actually it wasn't that. It was the paintings I made at New Year. So it was those paintings
Ah,
that I'd made that were in that show. Um, and both of those paintings are sold actually, and up until sort of the last 5 years, previous to the last 5 years, I'd never sold any work in my life, and apart from those two. So obviously they landed with somebody in
amazing.
a really resonant way, and so I didn't just chuck them up on
Yes.
the wall. They were very much the earthing of the entire idea.
Back to practice and being really present in the work. It sounds like that was a really pivotal moment. So, thinking then about how your work has developed, would you say that the seeds of the sort of the ideas and the concepts that are in your work really kind of took root then?
Well, actually, those roots were there present much earlier. So through the BA, I was making really, and thinking back to it now, it's quite frightening, the work I was making during my BA, because my mum had been sick for a long time, and we'd not known. But obviously my body knew, or something in my subconscious knew, because during that time, I was making all my work about the fear of a mother's death. And I was making
Gosh,
photographic work. I was doing semi-performance work, and then taking photographs of myself in the performative photographs, I would say, um, in the garden my mother grew up in the house that she grew up in. And I was like dressed in mourning clothes, and I was my poor little cousins who are still traumatized to the day, and I got them dressing up in these kind of like funeral gear. And
gosh,
but I was making, and I was writing a lot at the time, and my dreamscape, I've never had like Jungian therapy or anything like that, and I don't write my dreams down now, but at the time I was, because they were so powerful and frightening, and they were all about my mum dying. I had no idea she was ill.
gosh.
And this is another reason why, actually, after I graduated in 2003, the work had been so loaded with some kind of premonition or some kind of bodily knowing, some kind of subconscious understanding, like a warning. I actually
Yes.
found I was actually a little bit frightened of the work for a while, and my relationship to the act of making, like what was I doing? Was I, I don't like to use the words channeling or like some kind of other thing coming in, but I can't deny, looking back at that something else was vibrating in my subconscious and picking up on something that was not common knowledge. So I was a little, scared of my own practice. It sounds quite strange, but that kind of
It doesn't sound strange to me at all. And I know lots of people will have their own points of view, but I think having worked and coached so many artists and worked with so many artists, particularly over this last 6-7 years, I think the one thing that I know across all cultures is that artists' intuition operates at a very different level. And there's something that you were talking. I know this is not. I'm not comparing you, Alexis, but my mum was also very, very sick. She had cancer, and she was living in Crete. And the strangest thing, she was very close to her dog, much to the chagrin of the rest of us, frankly. But she loved that dog probably more than humans at one stage. And when she got sick, the dog got cancer too. And the dog got cancer, and it stayed with her. Like, I mean, it did not, but it knew my mum was sick before she was, because it started getting very, I mean, I think dogs are notorious for smelling cancer, actually, and there's been lots of tests where they can sense it. So not just because of those experiences, many, many more in my lifetime have I experienced humans and non-humans encountering each other and knowing things that have not been articulated.
Another thing to mention is that actually I forgot to say this, but the year before my mother died, her mother died. So my grandmother died, and then 1 year later, my mother died. And my grandmother never knew that my mum was sick. She had avoided that knowledge just by a matter of a few months. So there was this really, in that work that I was making and dreaming, and all the dreams were kind of set in my grandparents' house where my mum had grown up. And that's where I did the photographic work and the kind of performative action work that I was doing at the time, and writing a lot about this space. That the twin death, essentially, the mother and the grandmother within 12 months, was landing with me in a way that I can't find words for.
It's continued to echo through your work, Alexis, this sort of the maternal lineage and loss and memory. And I guess I'm sort of thinking it makes perfect sense as to why, if you felt there was some kind of premonition or some kind of conjuring almost, that you would resist kind of making work in such a way. So when you were cautious of the work, how did you find your way through that period?
Well, a lot of the work that I then started doing was from observation, just drawing what was around me. It's very much the culture at the drawing school to be making observational work. And I think I was carrying that through into the time after that, where I was just kind of trying to make self-portraits and trying to just paint what was around me, rather than going into that space, that grief space, I guess, and COVID did it. COVID was the trigger that allowed me to really enter that space in a much deeper, much more meaningful way. And I always think, and I've said it a few times, that it's almost like I'd had a lot of interruptions in my life, like things kept happening. And then in that time, I'd also had 2 children, and with very little support. So life was difficult. And one of my children is also neurodivergent. And so it's like even harder, in that space. So I was just exhausted and couldn't really see that my practice would ever become like a full-time pursuit for me. It was very much the kitchen table, finding spaces at home to make a bit of painting when my husband took the kids out to the zoo or whatever, snatched moments, which is so the vast majority of parents who are female parents who are artists, it's their experience, I know. And it was very much my experience. And I was planning on becoming a lecturer again, and I did actually. But it wasn't until COVID hit, and I think that universal interruption, that ultimate interruption, worldwide for everybody, that huge pause, which became, I think, a real leveler in terms of the art world, because as we all remember, everything turned inside Instagram, basically. It all became this one space. And at that time, anyone could find their voice, because I started doing the artist support pledge, and having never really sold any of my work before, it just so happened that I was making a lot of work at that time, beavering around at the kitchen table with kids screaming at me. And it was a completely insane time for us all. But through it, I started making different types of work. I'd been collecting knitting patterns and magazines from the 1950s and the 1980s, not really understanding why I was drawn to them, but I've been sort of collecting like you do in studios, and sometimes it can take a while to understand why you're picking things up. And I started grabbing these knitting patterns and these magazines and getting like the scourer from the kitchen sink and, baby wipes and starting to remove the ink from them. Like this kind of somatic need to sort something out, like I need to do something. So that started a whole new way of me coming into myself as an artist again, and understanding how the material presence of the things that I was picking up, the meanings that they inherently had. I didn't fully understand it really until I went back to the Royal College of Art to do my MA, finally got in and finally got to do it. It wasn't really until I went there that I could confidently articulate the relationship between material, the action, and the image. I felt very confused, like I didn't have authority to talk about my work. I couldn't even write an artist statement, I couldn't even do that, my confidence was absolutely rock bottom. And actually I want to mention someone here, because at this point, you're talking about coaching and stuff. I've only ever been coached once in my life by one person. And I'd applied to the Mother Art Prize, Procreate project.
Yes.
And I'd got shortlisted, and it was like such a big thing for me to get shortlisted. I didn't get into the final selection, but one of the directors, Diana Gravina, got in touch with me and said, I can see something really special in you. I would like to offer you free coaching, through lockdown. And I was like, what, really? Oh my God. But when we did it, I couldn't even look in the screen. That's how low my confidence was. And I would be saying things like, oh, I used to be an artist. I used to curate these shows. I used to be this. I used to be that. And she would tell me off and say, you are still I think you're a great artist, which is why I'm giving you my time for free, you know, really told me off. So there was a real pivotal moment there for me, I think. And worth saying thank you to Diana.
That's so good. And I know Diana, and she is great and respected and loved by so many. She's done so much for so many people. So, yeah, great to have that shout out. But also just to know sometimes when our confidence is low, we do need to borrow the confidence and thoughts of other people and how they see us and how they view us, I think, is really important. And very often, you know, somebody else can help us articulate our deepest desires, our deepest needs, and also start to create a framework for how you might actually achieve those things. So I think it is really important to acknowledge that, you know, if somebody offers you something as a gift, it's because they see something in you, and there is always a reward to that person too. You know, that Diana would have gotten something from that exchange, and knowing that she's helped you to become the, you know, the best that you can be, it, you know, is wonderful. I know you find the art world baffling sometimes. It is. This is exactly why I built the membership. Inside the membership, artists rebuild their confidence. They reignite their pride. They recover their sense of play and finally feel like they belong. They land studio visits, sales, shows, better fees, stronger relationships, and a genuine sense of agency. Here's how it works. You get the online membership hub on your laptop or phone and gain instant access to every live session, replay and worksheet, as well as an active community, so you're never stuck waiting for an answer again. You get weekly advice sessions with me where you can ask me anything you're stuck with, and I'm going to give you straight, honest answers. And you get coaching with me at an affordable rate. Plus, there are real life meetups, expert webinars, monthly studio visits with members, and 4 guest artist studio visits a year where you can ask your own questions live. And the best bit? It's an affordable price every month, and you can cancel anytime. So please don't keep struggling on a loan. Try it. 2 months from now, you could have answers to things that have been holding you back for years. What's very common for a lot of artists that I work with is discovering, you know, what's inherited and what's theirs, and separating out fears or sort of ceilings or kind of limiting beliefs, you know, where they come from, where they've been ascribed or how they've been acquired, and the kind of origin of some of those things is very interesting. When you start helping somebody to kind of pick apart, actually, whose voice is that? Or, you know, where does that story come from? Where does that idea that that's not possible for you? When did that start? And when you start realizing that some of those ideas are not yours, it's actually easier to reposition them and do something differently with them.
Yeah, it's true. I think as when you've been parenting and you're so tired and you feel like you've lost so much of yourself in that experience of parenting, you know, I couldn't afford to have a childminder. You know, a lot of the things that have held me back or in the past have added to low confidence is financial barriers. Honestly, a lot of financial things there. I couldn't afford a studio when I graduated. I couldn't afford to have a big enough house that I could have a room to paint in. I couldn't afford to send my kid to nursery until they got their 3 hours, you know. And it's all relative. At least I had a house, you know, and like I had a partner who was bringing in one stable income, and I'm so grateful for that. But it is much easier if you have a different situation. And even now, you know, even now with things changing in the market, you know, I sometimes ask myself questions. How sustainable is this long term? What's this going to look like in another 2-3 years?
I do I'd like to speak to that a little bit, if I may, just because I think you've
Yeah.
raised something really important. And I'm in the middle of writing a book, Alexis, and
Oh, yeah.
hopefully it will get published next year. But
Oh, goodness.
the reason that I'm writing it is because it speaks to some of these things, which is that
Mhm.
if you're not making the work that you're supposed to be making, it's very difficult to enter a dialogue with somebody in an authentic way, to build community, to build confidence, and then to earn money. And if you don't have confidence, you also don't, it's very hard to earn money. If you don't have
Mhm.
confidence, it's very hard to make the work that you need to make.
Yeah.
It's like, I have a kind of a framework really of thinking about it is the 5 C's. So they all need
Mhm.
to be in place for a sustainable creative life. So the first one, C, is create, then collateral, which is the way you represent the work in your PDFs, websites, socials. It's basically the things
Yeah.
that mobilize the work into the world so that it
Yeah.
can have a presence without you being present. Then
Mhm.
community, which as you determined, it can be really lonely being an artist, but it's like
Yeah.
choosing purposefully who your community is.
Mhm.
Confidence and how you practice confidence like an artist. Really, that
Yeah.
confidence doesn't just plop out of the sky. You have to practice it.
Yeah.
And then earning is also a practice. We have to learn how to
Mhm.
earn money from our creativity, and
Yeah.
again, but the first thing we have to do is to develop a kind of belief plan that it's possible for us, that all of these
Yeah.
things are possible for us.
Mm.
And so, there's something that I'm struck by, which is in the midst of all of the things that you've been through over the years, your
Mm.
creativity never actually left you. It was always
No.
with you in some form. And
Yeah.
so that part of you that was resilient, that was all knowing, that did have an inner compass, that did know what they were supposed to be doing,
Mm.
it was there all the way through.
Yes, definitely. And it's the very core of who I am, which was there, and I'm learning to listen to it more now as I'm more mature
Yeah.
because I can sit with it. I don't know why I can sit with it now a bit more, but in fact, life's never been harder in lots of ways for me. The last
Mm.
5 years since COVID, it's extraordinarily difficult to parent in the way that I have to parent, and but actually, those experiences have made the work what it's become. This urgency, this pushing forward. I have to do it. It's like it's too simplistic to say it's a kind of therapy. Um, I feel like if I'm not pushing and making the work to the highest level that I can possibly do it and keep changing it and keep finding, I I don't think I could cope really at all. And it's my support because I've never really had any support. I have a very supportive partner that I'm so grateful for. But not that many sort of supportive kind of other parents, or like you say, being an artist can be really isolating actually. And
Yes.
I'm not with a blue chip gallery, and I don't know if I ever will be, but I have heard people that join them saying it gets more isolating the kind of higher up you go. And I think I've experienced the last couple of years like that, a bit of that, just kind of pulling back, people who pull back, you don't want to have those conversations and friendships maybe in such an open way. It feels like there's quite a lot of competition at certain levels with it between artists, and the work becomes the companion. The work has become sort of the only thing I really have.
I think a lot of artists feel that way. And I think what I understand is that there are two zones that are vital, which is
Mm.
one which is locking in, to so to speak, to the making space, to self isolate so that you can actually tap into whatever it is you need to without additional influence, because you're processing the internal landscape and the external landscape. But then there comes a moment when the work starts calling to bring other voices into the mix with it. And there's a challenge in the letting go of the work, because there's often there's a relationship between you and the work that is so intense that you're still figuring out what it means to you. You're still figuring out what it is and still figuring out what it has to say. And if you bring it into relation too early, that could jeopardize your relationship with it. If you leave it too late, then you miss a moment where you felt energized with it. But there is a responsibility to advocate for the work, to be a custodian of it, to bring it into dialogue and relationship with others. And so we have to move from this kind of isolated space where you get into flow state and a kind of a Zen-like state with it in order to get to the good stuff. But then you have to move into this social space to kind of grease the wheels around the work so it can go into the world and live without you. So it's a very complex sort of coming to terms with what it is you've made and letting go of it. It's no wonder it's a complicated set of relationships, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like, doing this podcast, for example, I would never have been able to do this or have the confidence to do it. I can now, after all these years, now confidently talk about my practice. And actually recently I had to really stick up for my practice with someone. I've never really had to do that before, but I really enjoyed doing it. This kind of, oh no, hang on, you're not understanding this. You haven't taken the time to understand what I'm doing, and therefore this isn't going to work, kind of thing. And an experience like, I won't go into details, but an experience like that in the past would have like absolutely shattered me. But this time it was like, no, clearly you're just not understanding the depth of what this is. And
so I'm just really happy to hear that, Alexis. And also,
I loved it.
I think well, I'm really happy for our listeners to hear as well, because I think it's I think what I hear, and this is really what I try to help most creatives with, is that at some point we do have to separate the work from the self. And you move into this different space where you're advocating to share some of the kind of the rationale, but also the inspiration, the kind of starting points and what the work is representing from your perspective. But also, if you bring it into relation with, let's say, other curators or gallerists or commissioners, then they have to be tooled up to do some of that advocacy for you and the work. So there does have to be an exchange or a transference of knowledge and transference of enthusiasm where they are happy to share the things that are most important to you. So if you've done the work of being vulnerable enough to say, this is from personal experience, these are lived references, this is my perspective, my point of view, whether you like the work or not, these are the starting points. So if somebody gets given access to the backstage pass of an artist, that's gold dust. So if somebody says, I'm not hiding here, I'm here for you to say, like, this is not what the final work is about, but this is where it started.
Yeah.
So it's important for, like, you can take what it is that you want from my work when you come into encounter with it. But if you ask for my perspective, I'm going to tell you this is where it came from. This is what I did. This is what I was thinking about. This is what inspired me. This is what shocks me about it. This is what delights me about it. This is what makes me think about other things in the world. So I think if we afford somebody the agency to advocate on our behalf, they have to tool up with what we give them, right?
Yeah. And actually my work is sort of really quite multifaceted. You know, one of the things about my work is that it can look sometimes like a different artist has made it. I get told that that's not true, but you know, one moment it might be close to pure abstraction, and the next quite highly figurative. And so you have to have that conversation with me to understand what that's about. And the kind of relationships where I've found you sort of skirt around each other, but maybe it doesn't work, or you've walked away from each other, is where that person didn't tool up enough to understand what I'm doing. I'm not just producing paintings as products to sell. This is not what this is. And I'm not going to create a room full of very predictable, easily understood pictures, you know, pictures versus real painting. I think that's quite a big conversation. It certainly was at the Royal College of Art. And it was the first time I'd ever heard a tutor kind of talk to us about what's a picture and what's a painting. And I think in the current climate, there's been an awful lot of picture making, you know, rather than painting. And I want to make sure that at the beginning of every painting, that journey where I don't know where the work is going to go, and of course lots of painters work in that way, it's not special in any way, but it is mine, and I can't share exactly what a painting is going to be before I've made it. And I certainly don't know where the end will be, and if I knew what it would be, I wouldn't bother making it. You know, I've said this so many times now, but I honestly would rather go and teach full time than sit in a studio and be a production line for an aesthetic of mine that's highly coveted for a period of time. And then what, you know? And I've been asked multiple times, oh, it'd be great if they were all like that, or will you make more like that? And I'm like, I might make another one like that, but I don't know when, and it might be a couple of years, or I'm never going to make another one like that just simply because you've asked me. And there are people who work with me who love that about me, and there are other people who don't want to work with me because I am like that. And I think you've got to choose your circle, and you can't appeal to everyone. You can't appeal to every gallery structure or gallery director or curator. I'm actually at the moment bringing my circle a little bit smaller, because I've had quite a lot of people around me the last few years, quite a lot of different directors, different galleries in different countries, and kind of writers here and there, and curators, and it's been a lot of kind of noise. And I feel like as the art world is winding down a bit, I'm actually finding it a really fertile moment, because I think when I graduated from the RCA in 23, I think I came out of that in this kind of frenetic moment in the art world where galleries' income had started to drop, and they were scrambling to try and find the the new graduates whose work was having a selling moment. And there were lots of us, you know, lots of us were having that moment, and I was one of them. And you get lots of offers when people think your work is going to sell easily. But I found that a really stressful time, because it was like if you had a show and it hadn't sold out before it opened, then it was deemed a failure, or how's it gone? You know, like, has it sold out or not? And it's not, it's so damaging for artists that and I did have a couple of very successful years in terms of that sales and stuff, and it's why I've got the house I'm sitting in now, and I'm so grateful for that. But that space, that environment of, if it's not sold out then it's failed, is so damaging, and is not a way of sustaining any kind of artistic practice, because, you know, the moment a painting doesn't sell, you're out. So, but it's not like that now, which I'm finding a much better place to work in. It's so much more it's beginning to feel more holistic, where the people that I am working with still are those who I really trust and who have a much deeper interest in me, not just in the work, but in me as a person, and care if there's something going on in my life. And I'm sort of shedding some other people who don't have that kind of role in my career, which is, it feels like a good moment, because it means you can just focus in on a few really positive relationships rather than spreading yourself too thin.
Yeah, I think it's really good to hear. I think one thing I'd like to add to that is, I think is when I'm working with artists, I talk a lot about defining what success is for you on your own terms. And I think we have to do a better job for defining it for ourselves and articulating that as often as possible. Because in all fairness, I've worked with a lot of artists who have come out of commercial gallery relationships, or they've had a tough museum show experience, or I mean, so many different types of experience where it hasn't gone. And when we've actually looked at it, not as a post-mortem to beat ourselves up, or, you know, to stay in that kind of wallowing self-harm, but really to identify, how will we do things differently in the future? What is the learning here? How do I want my life to be moving forward? At every single stage, I think both artists and curators and gallerists and commissioners, all of us, don't take enough time to establish the framework of a relationship first, and to share very honestly who we are, what we have going on in our lives, what kind of brain we have, how we like to communicate, when we do our best work, what kind of things hold us back. You know, we don't set up that. We just go straight in for like the jugular of like a new project or a new thing. And then, because putting art into the world for everybody is such a challenging thing to do, at some point there will be a difficult conversation that needs to be had, and that is not always a bad thing. It's very often a good thing, because that, otherwise why wouldn't you bother? You just wouldn't bother collaborating. So but we have to learn to navigate challenging situations by knowing first what is important to us and why. What does good look like for us? What does success look like for us? And, you know, what do I really want from this relationship? What do I really want the other party to bring to the table? And what am I prepared to bring to the table? And I think what I hear is somebody who really knows, after having earned their stripes in so many different ways, they know what they want, and they are also willing to give if they're in relationship with the right person who's also willing to give. And I think that's a very honest place to be, because I imagine, Alexis, if you are going to commit to somebody, then you're going to do everything you can to make that work.
Yeah.
But also that you have expectations.
The best galleries will have a much longer conversation with an artist over a few years. You know, when a gallery, one thing I've really learned is that if you've had a show that's very visibly gone well, and by what the art world means by that is sales, if that's happened, and then you get loads of offers of different shows, be very cautious of that moment, because those people are only coming to keep their doors open. Because if they're coming at you after a successful show, and they'd not shown any interest before, just be very wary of that. And I've learned that it might not be worth entering into new conversations with new galleries just because they offer you a show after you've had, a successful show, because things change, and if their heart's not in it for the right reasons, it will become very evident. It's my full-time job. It's still my full-time job, and I am so grateful for that. I never expect to make more money than I need to keep a studio and take a small amount of money to keep going. I never expected to be a full-time artist. I never thought that was going to be my path. So the fact that I'm here feels a bit surreal. But I try not to let those voices come in, like, you don't deserve it. This was never going to be your path. Why are you doing this? Try not to let that happen. And I really enjoyed recently, I listened to Chantal Joffe speaking on, I think it was Talk Art or one of them, and she was so honest about these kind of crushing imposter syndrome feelings she was having. And I was like, what? But this is Chantal. Like, how can she feel like this? What? But it was just so affirming that everyone, I think, goes through that, and just to try to keep them at bay as much as possible. But what I'm realizing is that I for my practice to really succeed, for me to from one show to the next, to really push the boundaries of the practice, to make sure that it's growing and it's developing, I do need enough time.
It's a really great thing to make decisions based on positive desire rather than any anxiety or lack, where we think it's going to solve something for us. It's really like, what is the learning and what is the value add, so what can be learnt from saying yes to this, and who else is it going to introduce the work to? What's the sort of resonance and ricochet that the work can have in this new context? And, where can I go deep with a few people? And if I can go deep with a few people that really moves the needle for me, then it's worth the challenge, because even good challenges are a challenge, right? It's like, there's not, every single opportunity comes with a challenge. And so if you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else, aren't you? So I think knowing what you're saying yes to sounds really great, Alexis.
I have this kind of beautiful moment now, and it's the first time in about 5 years where a show's just finished in Oslo, and I'm in a group show in London soon, but I have this kind of beautiful moment of making, where my next show is not in the diary until June 27, and it's an institutional show. So it has a completely different vibe, a completely different conversation happening, and it just feels so great. It feels like you've got to the top of this like massive hill, and you can see, and it's like, oh my God, I can breathe, and like, come on, I need this space now to make this show, because this next show can't be just, well, it isn't going to be just another commercial painting show. It's going to be completely like something I've never done before. And I'm so excited by it, but I need that time, that thinking time, and development time.
It's interesting, isn't it? This perception of time that we sometimes get locked into, where everything suddenly feels urgent, and somehow that taking time, we lose something by, giving ourselves that space. But when you said 2027, I was thinking that's really not that long at all, is it? To make an institutional show, it's pretty epic. And so are we allowed to know where it's going to be, Alexis?
Yeah, I think so. It's at, well, it's a fabulous place. I don't know if you know it, but it's called East Key Watch It, which is it's the kind of visual art space that came from the Onion Collective, and they have this amazing kind of community arts regenerative program that happened in Watchet in North Dorset, and it's grown and grown and grown into this incredible arts and education program, but also visual arts, Arts Council funded institutional shows for artists. And I'm just so happy to be working with them. The conversations are very different when you're working in that space, and it just feels really brilliant to have people, even conversate. I had a conversation with him, about, nobody's going to be making any money from this show, and it's like, wow, it's such a great space to be making a show from. No one's going to make any money. No one's going to buy this thing I'm making because it's massive. It's going to be like a big installation. Like, there's no way you could just stick it on a wall. And it just, it's just like flipping everything, and allowing the depth of the meanings in my work and the material presence, and the choices that I make beyond the painted outcome really come to the fore. And I feel really grateful for that opportunity that's coming. Yeah.
So it does make me wonder, how do you find the time then to curate an exhibition in Hastings as you are?
I was joking with someone the other day. I was like, I'm really good at putting like open calls out on Instagram, and then I get bombarded with all this like positive feedback. Yeah, let's do it. And I'm just like, just be careful about what you put out there, because that might actually happen. But we're nearly there. So we're installing the show on Monday. On Easter Monday, driving to Hastings with the paintings in the back of my car, and it's sort of lovely. We've done the show with no budget at all. Everyone's been doing everything for free. We have even Hauser and Worth have allowed one of their artists to be in the show. It's eye-opening to experience the kind of. We've had to deal with lots of like insurance things with that, but they've been great, and everyone's just been great. And it feels like this, again, it just feels like this beautiful community of people coming together to do something without any financial intention. I find these moments so nurturing, and it's the fourth time I've curated an exhibition, and all the other times were before I had children. So maybe this is a big moment for me. Maybe this is, I'll look back on this in a few years' time and be like, that show was me really, getting to the top of then maybe another like big climb, and maybe on the other side of this is an easier time. I'd love it to be.
I'm sure it will be, Alexis. I'm curious, how did you choose the artists you wanted to be in community with this time?
So the community had sort of already built itself, really. So like, we all have neurodivergent children, and through Instagram over the last kind of 2 to 3 years, conversations were had, because I'd been quite open. I try not to overexpose the situation because it's sensitive, but over the years I have had that conversation going, and people would direct message me, people would write comments and say, let's talk, I'd love to talk or meet up. And it was just these beautiful moments of connection between these women who all understood just how difficult everyday life was, and how difficult it was to create amongst that, to keep a practice going amongst these often very extreme life moments and very extreme levels of parenting, which are wonderfully joyful as much as wonderfully difficult for all of us, of course. And so I knew all of them. And just bit by bit, it was actually, to begin with, I'd wanted to do a duo show with Kelly Jessamine. There's so many, her ceramic work spoke to me on so many levels, and we'd spoken at length about our shared experience, and we became friends. And even now, she's sharing with us yesterday the semi-glazed, almost finished pots, and just the way she uses colour, the way that it intercepts the space, and then her line work, and this kind of autobiographical exclamation, the way she uses words. I think I sort of do that sometimes in a sort of blogging way, sometimes with Instagram, but there is this like urgency in both of our practice. And I really wanted to do a duo show with her before, but then these other people started coming into my life as well. And I just thought, it's really great to see these shows about motherhood. And there's been so much more about it recently, and that's great. I just felt that there was another space that hadn't really been explored, that I'd not seen spoken about. And of course, it's such an important subject at the moment. If you're not in it, you might not be aware, but the SEND system is having a huge overhaul and has been in crisis for the last few years, absolute crisis, with enormous amounts of children refusing school and not able to access education. And if you can find a way to positively bring those experiences together and talk about the amazing work that these all-female mothers who are carers, as well as normal parenting, but also caring responsibilities that go beyond the normal parenting, are also managing to develop a practice alongside that experience. And I think all of the practices have adapted and been molded by that experience. And when I now look back at the last 5 years, all of that rubbing away, erasure, layering, cutting out, trying to make new narratives, trying to make sense of things. It's not just about grief or things in the past. It's very much about every day just trying to make sense of a space that's becoming overwhelming, a space that's becoming so loud and so hard to navigate. That's I think where the kind of use of collage particularly has come into my practice. This kind of, I literally have to cut you out and put you somewhere else. I have to take this and put it and create new worlds, because my world is not working in the way I expected to, like a kid with like fuzzy felt, or like doing a complicated puzzle and just like throwing it all up in despair and trying to make something else out of it.
I'm so grateful for you speaking about it, Alexis, because I know in this year alone, so when time of recording, we're just in April 2026. And in this year alone, I have worked with 10 women clients, with creative people, artists and arts leaders who are in the same position that you're describing. Yeah. So I know, firstly, listening to this podcast is going to be a huge relief that somebody else knows what they're going through. Secondly, the fact that there is a show where there's like an opportunity. But also what I really love about the artists you've put together at this show, it's at Amici Studios in Hastings, right?
Yeah. And George Mingolzi Marsh very generously came to me and offered his space. We're all doing it just out of the interest with the subject and caring that this is important, and let's just highlight this. And it's astonishing to us how few kind of press people have come forward, or they'd be like, oh, that sounds amazing, and then nothing. This is a national major news topic, and this is an art exhibition with some really quite big names of artists in it. There's no reason not to cover something like this. It'll be interesting to see where it gets written about and who writes about it, or not. and it will affirm so much.
I think, Alexis, not just because of the subject and the kind of the issues that it's going to raise, but I think the artists that you selected are fabulous and also incredibly unique and singular voices. So I think actually you've all got something really brilliant to say, but I think that the experience of living through, familial situation where finding your voice in the midst of that and also navigating the guilt and the bureaucratic and administrative challenges, but the structural challenges and still finding space to create something unique, I think is amazing. So I'm a big fan of a lot of the artists you've got in that show. So I think in terms of having real originality of thought, I think you've got a lot of brilliant minds in that show. So I can't wait to see how it unfolds.
We actually have, I was just going to say, we have actually got a museum who want to tour it next summer. And I've got a meeting in
amazing.
So like, to be I mean, it's not to be confirmed. They want to do it, so yeah, it's going to be going possibly a bigger version of it, maybe with more artists, or maybe just the artists will have opportunity to make even more significant work if they chose to be part of it. But I'm so excited, and the museum's paying for me to go up there. They bought me and Kelly's train tickets and booked hotel rooms. We're like, wow, this is great.
Amazing.
I
Oh, well,
know.
do you know, I think you'll have a lot more people reaching out after this show. I know the people that I can think of already. There's a handful of people that I think you should definitely connect with because I think you'll love the work as well. So I think brilliant. I'm just as we come to a close. I wondered what do you learn about your own work in that curatorial role?
Yeah, I had thought about that question, and I think we've kind of touched on it already, but that kind of intuition that artists have about other artists and their work, I think, you don't have much time when you're in this situation to like deeply study everything an artist has done before you invite them to do something with you. It's very much a kind of felt intuitive thing, and I think now bringing the works together, and I can't wait to see them together on Monday in the space, but there's so many overlaps between my own practice and lots of the artists that I've selected that I must have been kind of subconsciously aware of, but maybe not, able to vocalize that clearly. But I think, and that is how I work, I work in a very felt, intuitive way without knowing exactly how something's going to come together. I'm not much of a planner, I'm very much a kind of grab it and do it and feel as I go along. So I think the role of curator has been a kind of exact mirror of how I work in the studio, this kind of just going on blind faith that this is going to work. But it's this, this felt connection between one woman and another and the stories that we've shared. And I think the experience of bringing it together is very much how I bring my own paintings together. And I don't even know how to really verbalize that right now. And that's okay. I don't need to have to verbalize everything. It
That's
kind of floats
right.
around in a felt way. And actually it's affirmative. It affirms that it's okay for me to take that space as well, and people want to work with me, and that's been really lovely. And it's
That's
friendship as
wonderful.
well as anything else, and it's every single one of these artists is very passionate about being in the show. And some artists are very well known and some are not, and it's this gorgeous kind of non-hierarchical space that we're coming together in, because some artists haven't shown much at all, and others are blue chip, and it's just, how great is that? Because that doesn't happen that often in the
Yeah.
art world. You see a lot of the same
Yeah.
level artists coming together, or if they're not quite at the blue chip level but they're in a blue chip gallery, are they about to join that gallery? It's like, it's kind of second guessing what's going on. But it's like, does it have to be like that? No, because we're all just people, and we all just have these practices, and we all do it sort of generally for the same reasons. And I would love to see a more democratic approach to programming, across galleries. I would love to see more of these big galleries showing artists I've never heard of, like, I just would love to see a bit more of that. Introduce something else. There are so many people out there who need the opportunity to show their work. And the more and more I'm alive, I just want to be part of something that's a bit more holistic and a little bit more community based. I love the art world, and I intend to continue working in it, but I want to make sure that that level of care can go both ways between the gallery and the artist, and the artist to artist, and it doesn't have to be a competitive space. And I think we should all just be a bit nicer to each other.
Yeah. Music to my ears. With that in mind, Alexis, as we wrap up, who is an example of an extraordinary creative for you?
So I have chosen a lady who you may know, have come across or not. Her name is Jane Wildgoose. She is an artist, an academic, researcher, curator. She's worn many hats. She has a museum in Crouch End called the Wild Goose Memorial Library, and it's astonishing, very esoteric library of death and mourning. And I'm going to choose Jane because she was a friend of my mother's, and when I started making work foretelling my own mother's death, she took me to see Jane, to meet her, because I was just like obsessed with like the Winconsin death trip and all of this kind of stuff, a very childish way. But Jane, I wrote in my dissertation for my MA, which then was published by my gallery in America. Some people might have a copy of that. It is available on the Bellamy website, actually, to read for free. There's a PDF of it. But it starts with my mother's hair. And Jane Wildgoose had stored my mother's hair at the Wild Goose Memorial Library for quite a few years before I decided to take it back and to bury it in Epping Forest inside a tree. And it was that moment of burying this remnant of my mother, where I experienced a huge transformation in my life. Jane has always been a great supporter of my work. And if I have been homeless before after my mother's death, and I fell out with my dad. I didn't have anywhere to live. I'd stay at Jane's house. She even let me bring my cats there. But she's just this example of somebody who has spent her whole life dedicated so beautifully to the creative pursuit of living and breathing her research and her work as an artist as well. So she would be my choice. And if you don't know the Jane Wildgoose Memorial Library, you should look it up because it's amazing.
We do now. We'll include links to it in the show notes. And I think that's such a beautiful thing to share with us. Thank you so much. And how can listeners stay connected with you and your work, Alexis?
It's really only Instagram that I use. I have a sort of fledgling website that I probably need to update a little bit. I might be having a bit of a break from Instagram in a month or so, but I would always be back, and that's usually the best way to stay in touch.
Brilliant. And we'll include a link to that in the show notes too. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and wisdom with us. It's been such a pleasure, Alexis. Thank you. What stays with me after this conversation is not just what Alexis has made, but how she's made her way back to making it all. There are moments in her story that are deeply tender. The loss of her mother, The years where confidence disappeared, the sense of being outside of the art world looking in, and then later the reality of parenting, of caregiving, of trying to hold a practice together in fragments of time, often at a kitchen table, often in exhaustion. And yet through all of that, the work never fully left her. It changed shape, it went quiet, it hid for a while, but it remained. And what feels particularly powerful is the way she now speaks about that relationship, not as something she needs to prove or to perform, but as something that she's learned to trust. There's a clarity in how she describes her process, her materials, her decisions, a refusal to make work that is predictable or easily consumed. A willingness to say no when something doesn't align, even when it might look like an opportunity from the outside. We also hear how the conditions of her life have not sat outside the work, but have actively shaped it. The compression of time, the intensity of caregiving, the constant negotiation of energy and attention. These aren't obstacles to the practice, but forces that have sharpened it, made it more precise, more instinctive, more necessary. And I think that's something that you will probably recognise, whether you're navigating care, grief, financial pressure, or simply the complexity of building a creative life alongside everything else that life asks of you. There's no neat formula here, no single turning point where everything suddenly resolves. Instead, what we hear is a gradual return, a series of decisions, a deepening understanding of what matters and who to be in relationship with, and a growing confidence to stand by the work, even when it doesn't fit the expectations around it. So if you're in a moment where things feel slow or uncertain or fragmented, let this be a reminder that a creative life is not built in perfect conditions. It's built in real ones. And sometimes the most important thing is not how quickly you move forward, but that you keep returning to the work, to your instincts, and to the part of you that knows, quietly but persistently, that this matters. Thanks for being here. Till next time.